John, I want to move on to academia here and Donald Trump's war against Harvard University, but really also against higher education and all of the wokeness and the dependency on foreign students, which will, I think, ring familiar bells to a lot of viewers here in Australia. At the same time, though, I was struck by this little story out of Harvard where there was a professor, Francesca Gino, who had been stripped of her tenure and fired after it turned out that they'd fabricated data on multiple studies focused on dishonesty. John Hinderaker, the Harvard and all of these sort of higher education institutions, they're not really covering themselves in glory at the moment, are they?
Well, they're not. And frankly, James, I think that might have been one of the things that motivated Harvard to actually fire Francesca Gino. She's the first tenured professor that Harvard has fired since the 1940s. And she was kind of a celebrity. She taught at the Harvard Business School. She was the fifth highest paid employee of Harvard University, making over $1 million a year. And as you say, it's really ironic. She was an expert on dishonesty and honesty. and now the claim is made that there's fabricated data in various reports that she authored and co-authored. But I think the broader point here, James, is that there's a real crisis in the social sciences. People have found that more than 50% of all the findings being reported in social science papers are not reproducible. You know, you run the same experiment, you don't get the same results. Well, if findings are not reproducible, it's not science.
It's not science.
It's not science. And there is a lot of fraud going on in the social sciences and even in the hard sciences. And I think that's the bigger subtext of this story.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And I think the other sort of fascinating aspect to this, too, is the fight against universities over the issue of foreign students. And, of course, obviously, these universities get huge amounts of money from them, but particularly when it comes to students from China, where there are claims of industrial espionage and, political interference and stealing American state secrets and things like that. This, I think, has a very big impact because it also ties into the tariff fight with China. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the things that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is doing is reviewing student visas, and he's canceling student visas of people who engage in pro-Hamas protests and the like. But there are multiple scandals here. There have been many, billions of dollars given to American universities by foreign countries, mostly China and Middle Eastern countries, that have not been reported by the universities as required by law. There are some pretty unholy relationships between these major elite universities and foreign governments. And one fundamental point here is that a university like Harvard gets billions of dollars in American taxpayer money, but they don't think that they are an American institution. They don't care. The last thing they care about is American taxpayers. They think they are a global institution, and they train their students to be citizens of the world. And I think Donald Trump properly questions whether there's any reason why American taxpayers should be subsidizing these operations to the tune of many billions of dollars.
Well, it's a big problem here too, John. But before I let you go, I want to bring up a hilarious item you had on your Powerline blog exposing how ridiculous the New York Times is at the moment. You included a screenshot from the New York Times, which clearly shows their bias against Trump, with all of these hysterical stories all about, how terrible Republicans are and all the horrible things that they're doing. Tell us about this and this other great institution, or once great institution, the New York Times, and how far off the rail it's gone with its Trump derangement syndrome.
You know, James, the New York Times has really abandoned any pretense of being a real newspaper. It is now just a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party, and virtually every news story that it runs, national and international, that's what I showed there in that screenshot. It's so typical. Virtually every news story is an attack on Donald Trump. I mean, it's almost comical, and I don't think there's anybody, even on the left, who is still really paying attention to the New York Times. And I would add just one more thing, James, and that is that Jeff Bezos, who now owns the Washington Post, is trying to pull the Post back from the precipice and make it into a more legitimate newspaper, a more legitimate and a fairer source of news and information, so they don't continue going down that path of the New York Times.
Well, John, I had a look at the Washington Post homepage before we came on here, and I think Jeff Bezos still has a little bit of work to do on that, but we will stay ever presently tuned. John Hinderaker, thanks so much, and check out his stuff on the Powerline blog.